Dear devotees, as you all know, today we are having the second scholastic lecture from Revered Swami Tyagarupanananda Maharaj. He is presently heading Ramakrishna Mission Malda, West Bengal, India. Swamiji is an erudite scholar, and also he joined his spiritual journey in Ramakrishna Mission Ranchi. And afterwards he was heading as a principal of Ramakrishna Vidya Mandir, which is one of the autonomous top college. Today we are having a talk on message from the forest. That is the message of the Upanishads for us, application of the Upanishads in our day-to-day life.
So yesterday we had a discussion on the Bhagavad Gita. As most of you would be knowing, that in India, there are quite a number of scriptures actually. Because of its hoary tradition, it is sometimes difficult to fathom the extent and the depth of these books. So today's topic has been apt in a sense. You can lose yourself in a forest, in the maze of books that Indian philosophy can offer to you. But actually, to be more precise today, what we had meant was, we wanted to discuss what is known as the Upanishads. It has an alternative name. It is also known as Vedanta. Because you have had similar discussions online. I was going through your YouTube channel at the topics. Some inkling of the topic, probably you already have had here. Shanti Brahmanandaji or Swami Purnanandaji, I have seen the topics of their lectures. Just to give a brief historical background, actually the scriptures in India in those days were termed Shruti. The verb Shru means to listen. Shruti means the knowledge that was conveyed by hearing. I could give you an example. Suppose I try to convey to you some aspects of philosophy. After that, when you go out of the hall, probably every one of you would have your version of what we discussed today. So Shruti, what you listen, there is a distinct possibility of it being carried in different versions. So to ensure that such aberrations don't creep in the Indian philosophy, chanting, that is repetition of the text, take a very important part. You must have often heard Vedic Shanti mantras being uttered before the start of a function. These Vedic Shanti mantras actually are like, they, as it were, bring in good omens, that is, concentrate your mind. Don't allow it to deviate outside from the topic under discussion. In fact, every one of these books have one Shanti mantra that we start with. So Upanishads, alternatively known as Vedanta, is a part of what is called Veda or the Shruti. The Shruti, as I said, was conveyed by hearing. In course of time, after printing came in, Max Muller, under the larger C of the East India Company, could compile a large part of the Vedas. The book which he thus compiled is named as the Sacred Books of the East. A European thus had taken a very large role in the propagation and the in-depth study of Indian scriptures. Max Muller, as you would be knowing, was born in Germany, but a large part of his life he spent in Oxford. In fact, a few days earlier, I had been to London and the house where he used to stay and where Swami Vivekananda had gone to meet him, we had the opportunity to go to that house. In fact, last time I had been to Ireland a few days earlier, I had been to Trinity College. And there you have an exhibition. What's the name of the exhibition? Book of Kelly?
Book of Kells.
Book of Kells, right. So in the Book of Kells, I was very happy to see that Ireland too had a distinct monastic tradition. Many of the Catholic monks, they stayed here. Solitary lives they have spent here. In fact, many of the writings are thus compiled in that exhibition. A few days ago, I had been to Scotland. There also, I learned after visiting the places that Irish monks had even gone up to Scotland in those hoary days, where they would carry the message of religion, of values of Christ. Hence, Ireland, in a sense, has monasticism in their very society. As I came to know, that Catholic religion is more prevalent here as compared to probably England, where Protestant religion is more popular. The English church had its own version of Protestant religion, and that is the more established version. Why I bring in these divisions actually, because Catholic religion, by bringing in or declaring the greatness of a monastic life, of a life devoted fully to the pursuit of religious truths, in a sense is akin to the Indian philosophy. Or in other words, probably people from Ireland would have it easier to understand the basic core of Indian philosophy. In fact, we have at the back this photo of Sister Nivedita, Margaret Elizabeth Noble, in whose memory this center had been started. Have any of you visited her birthplace? Many. Achha. So Dungannon is the place where she was born. I went to that town a few days earlier. In fact, Nivedita has been more recognized after she passed away. On her 150th year, people discovered or understood the amount of sacrifice really that she had to make. Why was her sacrifice so unique? It was unique because in those days, it was extremely rare for a white woman to go there and work for the Indian woman. You must have got to have a certain sense of adventure, a certain missionary zeal, a certain sense of goodness to overcome all the hurdles and go to that distant land. Remember, India in those days was under British rule. So I remember one biographer saying most sympathetically, it said, well, Nivedita, when she went there, even the Europeans looked upon her with suspicion. Why indeed was she going there working among the Indians? No other Europeans are doing that. To cap it all, the people who she worked for, the Indians, would sometimes give Europeans title as, you could be knowing, Mlecha. Mlecha was a form of telling that we Indians are somehow superior to the Europeans. I'm not sure how it was, but that was a way of creating a division between the Indians and the Europeans. I'll give you a simile if it could help you understand. When Jesus Christ was born, Jerusalem or Israel was under the Roman Empire. But even then, the Jews there, they would create a distinction between the Romans and the Jews of the age. In fact, Jesus Christ, because he showed compassion towards the Romans and the Syrians, he was ridiculed by the priests in the Jewish clan. So, although the Jews were under Roman subjugation, they couldn't mix with the Romans who were their rulers. It was something similar in India also. Although economically India was under subjugation, politically they were dependent, yet they couldn't be broad enough to mix with the Europeans. Nivedita, when she took all the trouble to carry the light of education among the Indian girls, because she had been inspired by Swami Vivekananda, who with great passion had said, we require a lioness now to bring up the woman of India. The Indian woman still hasn't been prepared yet. And Swami Vivekananda strongly believed that work for the woman must be initiated by women themselves. Again and again, he stressed on the fact that women have great potential in themselves. Only it requires a little bit of opening up, unearthing. So Nivedita took all the trouble to go from here with her missionary zeal, to go there and stay at a place known as Bagh Bazar. I think at least Taposh Babu knows very well about Bagh Bazar, because Bagh Bazar is the area where Nivedita spent a large part of her life. But it would be probably wrong to say, or limiting the facts to say, that she spent her life only in the education of women. In fact, all-round development of India was what she wanted. For this, she was not contented with only education. And finally, she inspired many of the artists there. It was not mere vocal tonic, I tell you. In those days, Ajanta and Ellora, I think many of you must have heard the names. Ajanta and Ellora, any of you have gone in Maharashtra? Beautiful places, okay, and considered one of the World Heritage Sites today. They were actually lying in the forests. They had not been discovered. Somehow some European officials, they had gone hunting in the forest, and then they had discovered those paintings. Nivedita encouraged the Indian artists in Calcutta. Calcutta was then the capital of British India, to go and learn about those paintings. In fact, she paid for the expenses of some of the top artists who in later days would be very, very renowned, Nandolal Boshu and others. She, along with Brahmachari Ganendranath and Abanindranath was a very famous artist of Bengal. She herself went there to see how their training was going on. So Nivedita, when she passed away in 1911, because I had been to the place where she passed away in Darjeeling a few months earlier, in fact, not much was known about her. And she was, in fact, as I said, was looked upon more as a revolutionary than as a missionary, because she had a great role in protecting some of the topmost freedom fighters. If you could name one of the topmost, it was Aurobindo Ghosh, who in later days became a great spiritual leader as well. It was Nivedita who organized for Aurobindo to stay in Chandanagar, a place in West Bengal. She was exceedingly intelligent. She knew that Chandanagar, being under French rule, was not under the jurisdiction of the English. But to make things doubly sure, it was arranged that Aurobindo must sail out of Bengal totally, because Bengal, with Calcutta as the capital, was more under the British thumb compared to other states. Aurobindo was then taken to Pondicherry, which was another French colony within India. And Aurobindo spent the most of his later life in Pondicherry itself. So Nivedita played many roles in India. Many of her roles were recognized much later. In fact, to us, the founding of this center also is in a way a paying of honor, a giving of honor to this lady, who probably, when I went to Danganon, I found it, that probably was not that much known in her native country as well, because she had spent the creative part of her life in India. She was very intellectually strong even before she went away from England. She was the secretary of the Sesame Club, of which George Bernard Shaw was one of the members. She left behind all that. She was teaching in a school. She had gone to India with this missionary zeal in her mind. She wanted to raise the Indian woman. So, with our honors to her, let us now get to the main topic of today. In Indian philosophy, as I said, for a person untutored, it can look like a maze, a forest. Okay. But actually, Indian philosophy is said to have three main pillars, known as prasthana pillars. The three pillars are respectively Vedanta, which we are supposed to discuss today. Second is the Bhagavad Gita, which we discussed yesterday. And the third is, rather difficult name, it's known as a Brahma Sutra. Sutra means an aphorism, a condensed collection of words. And Brahma is the absolute, Ishvara. So Brahma Sutra is also known as the logical treatise. Why? Because Upanishads are many in number. We would take up a few of them and then leave the session open to questions. Because they had been composed over a long period. To give an example, suppose English poets had written poems over a long time. Naturally, Shakespeare, he had composed plays in which there were poems. There was Keats, there was Byron, there was Shelley. In the contemporary period, you have other great poets as well, T.S. Eliot and others. If someone wants to make a totality of English poetry, would that be easy? It would be difficult, isn't it? Similarly, the poets who narrated the Upanishads, or rather they are known as revelations, because what they understood from the intuition, they composed these poems. So these are known as Rishi Vakyas. Rishi means seers, seers of truth. And one thing, in contrast to modern composers, all of us, we are very keen to have our own names in print, isn't it? I remember a writer writing, oh, to see one's name in print. But in contrast, in the Upanishads, you won't find the name of the composers. The major Upanishads, I just name it for you, the Katha Upanishad, the Kena Upanishad, the Brihadaranyak Upanishad, the Mandukya Upanishad, the Mundaka Upanishad. In none of them could you understand who were the real composers of this Upanishad. What is the type of composition? What is the frame under which the Upanishads were written? Normally, you would have a person narrating the Upanishads. Okay. I'll give you an example. It will help you understand. This is from Taittiriya Upanishad. It says that, you see, there was a young lad. His name was Bhrigu. Bhrigurvai Varuni Varunam Pitaramupasasara. So here was a lad. His name was Bhrigu. So he went up to his father. His name was Varuna. And said, "Oh, father, will you teach me the basics of philosophy? I'm yet to understand what philosophy really stands for." So his father, Varuna, himself an erudite person, he starts telling him by stages. Just as, see, mathematics, the same problem in class 5, the teacher would teach by one method. As you grow up in class 7, you can solve the same problem by another method, isn't it? If you land up in a still higher class, you can solve by still intelligent and smaller steps. Similarly, the world that you look around, his father said to his son, you see, persons exist by different layers. How was that? He started out. He said, you see, Annam Brahmeti Vyajanat. Bhrigu was anxious to know that who is Ishvara, who is God, how do I know him? His father, as the first answer says, you see, know food to be Brahman. This is one thing that you cannot avoid, isn't it? You might not read the books, you might not hear about great philosophy, but food is known to everyone. So he started with the easiest. He said, know Anna to be Brahman, Anna to be God. Why? Because you see, he explains to his son, from food only, all the creatures have come. Their gross bodies, it is nourished, it grows and decays unless proper anna comes in them, proper food is given. The son, on hearing what his father was saying, meditated on it. He understood. Then he opened his eyes again and said, I want to hear still more. His father understands that he had passed the first level. He says, okay, prano brahmeti vyajanat. Prana is breath. None of us can see the breath, isn't it? But it's very vital. All of us, we have understood it during the corona times, isn't it? When we face breathlessness, all of us were anxious that, am I also affected by this pandemic? We would rush to the doctor sometimes. We would be ashamed to convey even to our relatives that I'm afraid of this disease. But how do they know about this? Prana. Prana. Breathlessness when it comes. So prana is an index of your life. Upanishads have even divided up the different kinds of breaths. Okay. The air that you give out is one. The air that you breathe in is another one. Then you hold the air for a time in the lungs. Okay. I think all of you have heard the name of pranayama. Very popular name today, pranayama. Pranayama is the exercise in breathing. You do physical exercises, okay? In England and Ireland, people are exceedingly conscious about physical exercise. People are running all week, morning, evening, see, people running, okay? So you do physical exercises. But how breathing exercises? Swami Vivekananda in his book, Raja Yoga says, you see, imagine a person who is very restless, who have had a quarrel in his house. Okay? When he goes out to the office, he's still breathing heavily. Others won't know why he's breathing heavy. But because his mind is agitated, so his breathing is heavy. On the reverse, when the mind is calm and steady, the breathing too is regulated, disciplined. There is a pattern in breathing. Okay, you're not breathing heavy anymore. Pranayama actually puts the cart before the horse. What does it do? Earlier, when the mind was restless, the breathing was heavy, isn't it? So the mind came first, the breathing came as a result. Pranayama says, well, you control the breathing first. By that, you can reversely control the mind as well. So pranayama, the exercise of breathing, helps you in controlling the mind. It's an accessory to control the mind. It's not merely a physical exercise. So in the second level, the son is taught by the father, you see, Prana is very important. Look at all creatures. Unless they can breathe, they do not exist. Isn't it? Isn't prana important? His son said, yes, yes, that's right, that's right. Then again he thought about it and understood, well, this probably is the second layer. You ought to have something higher than this. He goes up to his father, and father says, okay, I have taught you about the physical body, about the breath. Now think about the mind. The mind is not visible to the eye. Neither is the breath either. But breath, at least you feel the impressions. You can feel by your hand when you breathe in. But the mind is still finer, isn't it? Just as when the leaves fall and was a heavy gust of wind, by the effect of the falling of leaves, you recognize that there was a storm or a gust of wind. Similarly, by the types of external works a person undertakes, you can understand his control over the mind. The mind too is invisible, like the air is. And yet the mind is exceedingly important. Prana, breath, and mind, both of them are invisible. So in this level, Bhrigu is taught, you see, still finer is the mind, physical body, then prana, then mind, one after another. He goes finer and finer. Finally, his father tells his son, you see, after you cross different layers, then you finally reach up to your real self that is within. It's like peeling the different layers of the onion. Sri Ramakrishna would give this example. He would say, as you go on peeling one after another, finally, what do you reach up to? Then he laughingly says, of course, you reach up to nothing. You cannot see anything. Similarly, where you reach up to, that is the Brahman, the Ishvara, that is not tangible, that is not seen by the senses. As I said, by examples which are understandable to persons, the Upanishads are trying to take us to understanding of Ishvara or Brahman. I'll give an example from another Upanishad, probably the most well-known of the Upanishads. Okay. I'll take two stories from this. First is the example of, or the story of, a very renowned sage. His name was Yagyavalkya. So Yagyavalkya, sages in those days were often married. So Yagyavalkya, the story goes, had two wives. One of them was named Maitreyi, another was known Katyayani. So Yagyavalkya, as he gradually got older, he called his wives and said, you see, I want to divide up my property amongst you two and want to retire to the forest. Message of the forest is the topic for today, isn't it? So he said, I want to retire to the forest. So the Upanishad, this Upanishad, Brihadaranyak Upanishad, jocularly says, one of the wives became very happy with this. She was Katyayani. She was satisfied. But Maitreyi was more intelligent. She came up to Yagyavalkya and said, these treasures that you give me, all the lands that you give me, will this give me immortality? Why are you, after all, giving all these up and retiring to the forest? Yagyavalkya says, you see, Maitreyi, you were dear to me earlier, but now you are more dear to me, because never can these objects of the senses give you permanent happiness. So how can you get permanent happiness? Then Yagyavalkya discusses or hints at what Brahman is. See the wonderful passage. Huh? Swami Vivekananda actually quotes this passage profusely. So I'll just give you one or two lines to give a little taste of what the Upanishads stand for. Sahovacha Nava are patyu kamaya pati priyaya bhavati atmanastu kamaya pati priyo bhavati. He says, you see, O dear one, it is not that the husband is dear to the wife for his own sake. It is really because the husband is the self, the Brahman. Probably the wife doesn't know it still. Similarly, with all earthly relationships, with all earthly possessions, what he said was really that all sources of perception, of joys, really are the reflection of Brahman. We are yet to understand this, but Upanishads hint at that great truth actually. So as you go on listening to these, the Upanishads speak about a method, in fact. They say Shravana, then Manana and right. Shravana is listening. Okay. Manana is cogitation, thinking over and over again. When you say, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, it means that I am Brahman, I. You listen to this and cogitate, think deeply. How can I be Brahman? I was born in so and so place. I have a passport for myself. This is my age. How can I be Brahman? Then you think deeply and understand, when it is said that you are God or you are Brahman, it doesn't speak about only your body or how long you have lived, what are your education, where you stay, what is your nationality, what is your nationality, or what is your occupation. It tells about a higher self that probably we are yet to realize. So through cogitation or manana, you intellectually understand what it is, but still you haven't arrived at the truth. For this, you require a deep meditation. This is nididhyasana. Nididhyasana has the root verb dhya within it, isn't it? Dhya is dhyana, meditation. So first, Sri Ramakrishna used to give this example. You see, it's an Indian fable. It says, you see, sometimes the snail would drift along on the waters of the ocean and would wait for the star to be in the skies. The snail had heard that when the stars are in the sky and a drop of rainwater falls within the snail, a jewel can be manufactured. So the snail waits for a long time. When will the rains come in? When will the skies open? After the skies open, the water needs to fall in the snail itself, not outside. It waits patiently. And finally, when the drop of water goes into the snail, there's a small dust particle within the snail. The dust particle is enveloped by this rainwater. And the fable goes that this snail then dives at the bottom of the ocean and then waits patiently for the jewel to be prepared, produced, manufactured. Sri Ramakrishna uses this fable to illustrate that, see, once you have known what the truth is, do not go for any more ratiocination. It's useless to go on discussing philosophy. First, you must realize the truth, listen to the truth. In fact, I had mentioned the book Brahma Sutra, okay? In the Brahma Sutra, it is said, one aphorism says, you see, how do you know what Brahman is? None of us have tested what Brahman is. Have any of you gone to Antarctica, by the way? Any of you gone there? None. Do you believe that Antarctica is there? You believe it, isn't it? So often, without a first-hand experience also, we believe a truth. We do not test everything. So the Brahma Sutra aphorism says, when there are persons of exquisite character who are men of truth, then you must have belief in their perceptions. Just as a person who discovered Antarctica, some of them even lost their lives. And finally, when they put the flag on the South Pole, then people came to know that there is a land known as Antarctica. Now we have expeditions there. In fact, some of the countries, they have stations there. India is one of them, where they do different kinds of research. But the initial explorers, it was very difficult for them. The rishis or the seers of truth, similarly, do this work of exploration and declares to us, he declares to us what the truth is. Once you know what it is, then you must give yourself heart and soul to the realization of the truth. It can so happen that your life can go in ratiocination. Does it happen only to the modern men and women? No, not at all. Let us look at the life of Swami Vivekananda, okay? The Upanishads say that, you see, to be able to realize the truth, you must have good teachers and good students as well. Only good teachers won't do, okay? Unless you have a proper receptacle, then the teachings that the acharya, preceptor would convey, it would only fall on stones, isn't it? So Swami Vivekananda or Narendranath Datta in his earlier life is considered such a student. Upanishads say, Ashishto Balishta Dradishta, of strong mind and strong will. Okay. Why is Swami Vivekananda's life so important to us today? Only because he had preached the Vedanta for the modern men and women? No, not only that. Because every inch of Sri Ramakrishna's realization, he tested. Sri Ramakrishna would laugh and say, you see, when you go to the money changer, you must test the coins properly. When we took the British currency to the counter and wanted dollars for it, you must count it properly, isn't it? Sri Ramakrishna would laugh and say, when you believe in a preceptor, first test him properly. So Narendranath did the testing to an extent which is really unimaginable for even modern men and women, I can assure you. Sometimes he tested Sri Ramakrishna to an extent which caused irritation to other disciples. But Sri Ramakrishna was not upset. He knew that this was one boy, one lad. Once he is convinced about the truth, then he will put his whole heart and soul to its realization. Thus, that was how Narendranath, after getting, as I said, the Brahma Sutra says that first listen to the Acharya. If he is a man of character, believe in it, and then spend the whole life into it. So Maitreyi, coming back to Maitreyi's story, Yagyavalkya and Maitreyi, they are not merely husband and wife. The husband tells his wife that, you see, everywhere that you see in the world, all these essentially are Brahman. You don't understand it, isn't it? These appear to be vacant words. For that, you must lead a life of character, lead a life of sacrifice. Only then can you reach up to that. Maharaj had rightly hinted, how can you practice Vedantic principles? We'll come to that point little. I'll tell you another story of Brihadaranyak Upanishads, okay? As I said, Brihadaranyak Upanishad has Yagyavalkya as the main proponent, main rishi, main seer, okay? So Yagyavalkya once went up to the court of Janaka. Heard the name of Janaka? Janaka is known as the father of Sita. But Janaka in his own right was a great king. So Yagyavalkya went up to the court of Janaka and said, you see, Raja, okay, Kama Prashnam Eva Vavre. You can ask me whatever questions you like. Kama Prashna. Kama means desire. Prashna is a question. So he leaves it open. You can ask whatever question you like. Okay. So Yagyavalkya says, when he gives this option to Janaka, Janaka says, you see, people in this world, they move around, they talk, they interact. What is the source of light? How did they do this? In those days, of course, electricity wasn't there. So Yagyavalkya says, well, the sun is there in the skies. That helps people move around, talk, have their food. And society exists. Janaka, the king, as I said, he was a wise person. He said, well, when the sun sets, what happens? Yagyavalkya then says, the sage says, that well, when the sun sets, the moon is high in the skies. The rays of the moon, soft ones, they then help you find the way. Well, even when the moon sets, then the sage replies, well, the fire is there. Okay, when the fire too is extinguished, in the darkness of the night, what would happen? You didn't have torchlights in those days. You didn't have the mobile torch either. So the sage says, well, words are there, words. In the darkness of the night, one would say, oh, I am here. Don't worry. So words are the source of knowledge. So even when words are quietened, words are not there. The sun is not there. The moon is not there. Fire is not burning. Even the words have been silenced. What happens? Then the sage smiles and says, well, then you feel that I exist. I need no other corroboration from anyone. Neither the sun, nor the moon, nor the fire. No external agencies are required to prove my existence. I understand that I exist in my own right. See, these are wonderful methods of taking you to the truth. It's not that only listening to this will help you fully realize. It's not that. It's first the intellectual steps that take you nearer, actually, that help you have a hint of the truth. There is another anecdote of a wealthy householder. His name is Shaunaka. Shaunaka. Once he goes up to his preceptor, very learned person. His name is Angirasa. This comes in the Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad. I narrated stories respectively earlier from the Taittiriya Upanishad and from the Brihadaranyak Upanishad. This third Upanishad I'm going through. I'm just giving you some stories. So he says, Shaunaka says, rich householder. He says, Shaunako Havai Mahashala Vidhibadupasanna Papracha Mahashala. He's a very wealthy person. Very wealthy, okay? Vidhibat Upasanna. He goes as per the norms of the student. He is respectful, okay? He goes with the proper regard towards the teacher. What does he say? He says, oh teacher, there are so many branches of knowledge. I do not know which to study. What takes me to the final goal? So many branches. Suppose a man is really eager to have knowledge. Suppose you enter a library, sometimes you feel at loss, isn't it? It's like getting into a big department store. So many wonderful books. You see literature, science, encyclopedia. poems, then different languages are there. You are at a loss which book to study, isn't it? So Shaunaka puts a very simple question. Can you name one or two books which can help me realize the truth? Some of you might be teachers. Before examinations, students are in a rush, isn't it? They are nervous. They get to the teacher and says, so many lessons I cannot master so easily. Please give me the important ones. Please tick for me the important ones. So Shaunaka says, you please name us a few branches which will be helpful for me. Then the teacher said, you see, indeed there are various branches of knowledge. Rigvedo Yajurveda, Samavedo Atharva Vedaha. The name of the four Vedas, you know, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharva Veda. He says, you know, these Vedas themselves are big, like tomes. Shiksha Kalpo Vyakaranam Niruktam. Vyakaran is grammar. Every language has grammar. Shiksha is the science of pronunciation. In Sanskrit, pronunciation is very much stressed on. Nirukta is etymology, the root of words. Okay. I believe many of you must have seen thesaurus, isn't it? Thesaurus. It helps you go to the roots of words. In Sanskrit, nirukta is important. Words are exceedingly important in Sanskrit. So how to gradually drill through a word and get to the meanings is considered an art in Sanskrit. Okay. Chando Jyotishamiti. Chando is lyrics. You know, in all languages, poetry came earlier, then prose. Strangely, isn't it? If you ask someone to compose a poem extempore, he would be at a loss. If you ask them to say something, that should be easy. All of you are senior persons. But in terms of literature, prose came early. Then prose came later. Poetry came earlier in most of the languages. So chandas, that is meter, was important in poetry. Then the teacher calmly says, you see, all these are lower knowledges. Remember, he includes even the Vedas as well, which the Indians consider as the highest knowledge. What he meant was, the mere words of the Vedas won't take you to truth. The highest truth is Tata Parayaya Tad Aksharam Adhigamyate. Adhigamyate is realize, understand. What do you realize? Aksharam, that which doesn't decay. All of them are negation, you see, which doesn't decay. You do not see, you do not feel. All of them are negations actually. Because what we perceive by the senses, if you want to go beyond that, you cannot perceive. What I mean is, I could give you a nice incident actually. When Master Mahashaya, that is Mahendranath Gupta, he went up to Sri Ramakrishna during the second visit it happened. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, this person, Mahendranath Gupta, he was the headmaster of a school actually. Very educated person. Humble, but very educated. He knew English literature well, knew the sciences well. He has studied the Bible thoroughly. So Sri Ramakrishna asks him, Acha, will you tell me which kind of manifestation of God do you like? Whether it is with forms or without forms. So Master Mahashaya, as I said, the teacher, Master Mahashaya, Mahendranath, he is puzzled. He says, is it like going to the coffee counter and saying, do you require coffee or tea? Is it like that? Can God be with form and also without form? He should be either. He should be either without form. That is, he is not confined to particular forms. Or he should be with forms. Sri Ramakrishna is asking me, is God without form or with forms? Which do you prefer? So Master Moshe, intelligent person, he says, I prefer God without form, because he was well educated in English literature, English sciences. He says, for Bengalis of those days, they thought that image worship was superstitious. Okay. So he said, I consider God without form more close to my heart. So Sri Ramakrishna gently smiles and says, well, that is good. But remember that God can be with form, he can be without forms, and he can be still beyond. Master Moshe is at loss. He's surprised. Without form, with form, still beyond. What does he really mean actually? Okay. Our scriptures say, Upanishads also say, you see, the world that we see is conditioned by our understanding, by our mental perceptions, what we have experienced. Swami Vivekananda says in one of his lectures, suppose someone asks you to think of the infinite. Okay. What will you think? He says, you will think of the great blue sky, or you will think of the huge ocean, or you will think of a big green field. But is that really infinite? No, it is not. When you really go to details, you will understand. When you think of the ocean, really you are thinking about how far your eyes, your perceptions have gone. You cannot think beyond that. When you think of the sky, only what is visible to you, you can think how big is it to that extent. Similarly with the green as well. If you just consider the reverse, it will be clearer. Suppose any of you are asked, can you think about the year that the Sepoy mutiny was held in India? Of course, many of you would be knowing the year. What was the year? 1857. Okay. But suppose any of you are asked that, well, can you think of the incidents of that era? You would tell me, what do you mean, Maharaj? Absolutely foolish stuff you are speaking. I was not born then either. How can I think? So see, your mind is only able to comprehend, understand that period which you experienced for yourself. Back in 1857, it is in history, not comprehensible to you. You have read in the books. Probably you have seen a film also on that, but you haven't had a first-hand experience. But would that mean that those events haven't happened? They had happened, but you cannot understand them well. So this proves that our experience or our understanding is conditioned by our own mind, what we have experienced. Yatha karma, yatha srutam, Kathopanishad says. Yatha karma, as works we have undertaken, yatha srutam, as we have heard. I have heard that there is a place known as Antarctica, where a Norwegian flag was unfurled by the person who discovered it. I have heard about it. I haven't seen, but I visualize it. Yatha srutam, sruta is heard. Yatha karma. I work in the IBM. I'm deputed. I go to America and go to a city known as Houston. I look at the city, and when I come back, someone says, do you know the town of Houston? You say, yes, I definitely know. I've gone there. For the others, it is a distant experience. For him, it is a more realistic experience. So those experiences that you have for yourself, yatha karma, work, or as you have heard, yatha srutam, your understanding is limited by that. Beyond that, you cannot understand. If someone asks you, any of you, by chance, just for inquiry, any of you know the Portuguese language? Anyone? No one, no? Fortunately not. It will help my example rather. Okay. Suppose you are asked to give me a few words in the Portuguese language, you will say, I don't know. Excuse me, Swami. So your understanding, your presentation of facts, your getting knowledge is conditioned by what you have acquired till now. The Indians go a step further. They say, not only in this life, you have had impressions, memories, sanskara, impressions, which go still further. In fact, one of the greatest of philosophers or religious teachers, Bhagavan Buddha, says that he has had 500 lives, 500 lives. So we are smaller people. We must have had a few more, isn't it? Even if he had to be born 500 lives to be what Bhagavan Buddha was, even today, a beacon to humanity, born Siddhartha in the kingdom of Kapilavastu, and later he grew up to a great saint. Even then, he had to plow through 500 lives to have had this realization. So we don't remember all those lives. But the philosophy says that those impressions of those earlier lives were there. Stamps had been there. Do you remember all of them? You say, no, I don't remember all of them. The Yoga says, the Yoga Shastra says, when by proper cogitation you can concentrate your mind, you can go back and have a recollection of your earlier lives also. You can feel or you can even doubt that this is unrealistic. But this is what Bhagavan Buddha did. He narrated those earlier 500 lives, and those collections or that collection is known as Jataka tales. And Buddha was so candid, he sometimes was born a horse in those stories. Sometimes he is born as a servant. He did many wrongs in the earlier lives, in those tales. And today, as he goes through the different experiences, now he is hell-bent and has finally nirvana. Today we went to a beautiful garden, the Ganesha Gardens. Ganesha Gardens, isn't it? So there we had Victor's Way. There we had big motifs or images of Buddha. See, by going through these experiences, he finally arrived at the truth. So Upanishads, in fact, gives a clarion call to humanity that you see, there are great truths to be known. This part, I end with this quotation from the Upanishads with Swami Vivekananda, translated at the Chicago Parliament. This is from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Don't be puzzled by names. These are like poems only. Huh? As I said, like Shakespeare was a poet, Keats was a poet, Byron was a poet. Similarly, these Upanishads are like different poems by different composers. Shvetashvatara Upanishad has a line, it says, a rishi says, Srinvantu Bishve Amritasya Putra Ae Dhamani Divyani Tastu Vedahametam Purusham Mahandam Aditya Varnam Tamasastu Pare. He says, well, see, I have found the truth. The rishi, the seer, he declares. After he realizes this, it's like discovering a big pot full of jewelry, you know. He wants to share it with others. This happened with Buddha also. After he had the realization, he was so eager to spread the message. He was so eager. It comes in his life. The rishi also comes in and says, are you listening, men, or even the gods? Only by knowing that great one can you be saved from the fear of death. There is no other way, he says, stressing it. There is no other way. There is no other way. Swami Vivekananda, after declaring the message of the Upanishads across, you could say across the globe, because he had gone to America twice, he had come to England twice. In those days where traveling was so difficult, we didn't have planes. The motor cars too hadn't been invented. he took all the trouble to visit many of the countries in Europe even. Okay. Going back to India, he understood that, well, philosophy is too intangible, too above the heads, too intellectual actually. Okay. To make this practical in day-to-day lives, you need to have a more hands-on philosophy. This he, in a sense, took from the Bhagavad Gita. This is the message of Karma Yoga actually. In Bengali it is said, you see, you do works in the sense with the idea that all are basically manifestations of Shiva. Shiva Gyan se Jiv ka seva karo. Shiva Gyane Jiva Seva. All are manifestations basically of God. How does it differ from the Christian idea of service? Does it improve on it, or is it basically the same? Because these doubts were cast by even some of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. But actually the idea of this Karma Yoga is that what Swamiji proposed, or what is really the basic theme of the Ramakrishna mission, it says that it is not merely social service. Swamiji says, when you give help to the poor, the needy, you must bow down before him or her and say, "O Bhagavan, O God, please accept this small service of mine. I'll be blessed if you receive this service." You do not stand on a pedestal and throw items to them. It's not the idea. You feel blessed that you are able to provide this service. Why? As you give the service, he benefits or she benefits. How do you benefit? Swamiji says, by this, your sense of unselfishness will come. Your sense of trying to cling on to objects of enjoyment will gradually wither away. It won't come easily. It would take time. That is why this doctrine of service is now very much of the part of the Ramakrishna mission. Upanishadic doctrines are great philosophies, but realizing it in our day-to-day lives require practicing of this gospel of service, unselfishness. Okay. So with these few words, I end the main lecture, and it's open for Q&A, question and answer. Thank you, all of you, especially to Shanti Brihadaranyak, who took all the pains to invite me here. Okay. Thank you. And especially who couldn't come yesterday, you are all the more welcome, so that we can share your experiences, your comments, or probably your questions as well. I'm so happy that some of you who are basically from Ireland, you too have come in. We have come all the way from India. When you also come to the ashrama, we feel that our efforts are worthwhile, sharing with you our philosophy.
I have a question.
Yes, certainly, certainly.
This is, it's more a transformation from you. You just now mentioned, you ended with a note saying that Upanishads is only philosophy and what in Ramakrishna mission you practice. So I always have this query, what is Vedanta? And is Vedanta the same as practical Vedanta, which Swami Vivekananda has always laid stress on?
That's
So is that what you said, that selfless service?
Actually, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita has a wonderful storyline. That is why people are really enamored of the Gita, I tell you. Because Bhagavad Gita is set in a battlefield and it talks about practical religion. To summarize, it tells Arjuna that do not fly from the battlefield. By doing the proper work, you as a warrior, even apparently the bloodiest of actions, killing of a person even, can lead you Godwards, provided you do that unselfishly. Okay. So in one of the praises of Gita, it is said that just like you weave a garland out of a number of flowers, different kinds of flowers, similarly, Sarva Upanishada Gava, Dogdha Gopalanandana. Different Upanishads, as it were, like the flowers, which Krishna weaved into a garland. He milched the Upanishads and gave the essence for Arjuna. And through Arjuna, all of us have understood. So to get to the main point, actually, the biggest commentator on the Upanishads was Shankara, Shankaracharya. Okay? It is to Shankaracharya really that people could discover the Upanishads again. It was he who much later brought the Upanishads to the limelight by his brilliant commentaries, I tell you. Swami Vivekananda would again and again borrow the intellectual premise of Shankara. He was all praise for his intellectual prowess. So there, in the translation, you'll see Shankara telling you that you see in the first phase, where an untutored mind, that mind requires a bit of cleansing, clearing. When the mind is clean, just as when a mirror is cleaned, then you can see the reflections of the sun better, isn't it? In the mirror, sometimes even the reflection is so strong that you feel that your eyes are dazzled. Similarly, you can be a reflection or a revelation of Brahman, provided your body and mind is pure. But how can you make that pure? It says, for this, you require to do unselfish work. What is unselfish work? Sometimes youngsters come up to us and say, Swamiji, we want to do unselfish work, but for that we don't have time actually. We can only come on weekends, or for weekend Karma Yoga, maximum one day we can do. Actually, Karma Yoga is not meant to be for a weekend holiday trip. It's not like that. Karma Yoga is meant to be a philosophy of life. Whatever work you are doing, if you're a doctor, if you're an engineer, if you're a businessman, even if you're a housewife, every work of yours, theoretically, is supposed to be an oblation into the fire that this society is. The society known as Virat, Virat means big, which is a manifestation of God. Into that, every work of yours is an oblation. Into that, you offer every small bit of yours. The philosophy is grand. But you can question, Swamiji, it's nice hearing that, but I can't practice it actually. When I go out from here and see a person misbehaving with me, somehow I lose my cool and I start quarreling. Then later I lament that this shouldn't have been done. This is practice actually. Again and again you must tell yourself, no, I should be disciplined. I should be well behaved. I should be unselfish. So to get to your point actually, as the mind is clarified, Shankara says, then you can gradually move towards external karma to the pursuit of knowledge. Then only the Upanishadic truths will dawn on us better. First level, intellectual understanding, okay? For that, you require, for any discipline, doesn't it happen? Suppose a teacher teaches you a difficult mathematical problem in the classroom, okay? You don't understand that initially. What do? You faithfully copy it down. You leave it for the later time. You go back to your room, in your house, consult the books, again and again, go on thinking about it. Probably you take the help of a senior elder student as well. Then suddenly you discover it. Arey Baba, wonderful. Earlier I couldn't get at the truth. What logic? Then you, in a sense, mentally go back to the class again. Compare the notes, and then you have a full feel of it. For any teacher, I think definitely some of you must be teachers here. All of us, in some way or another, teachers for our own children at least, isn't it? Actually, for a teacher, always, when you learn the thing yourself, you have in the first phase of learning. But when you teach it to your students or to your children, then in a sense, you learn it anew. You learn it newly. In fact, when you teach someone beyond the printed words, you find newer and newer meanings into that. You discover the intuition. You discover what was original. I'll give you an example. Okay. Shakespeare has a wonderful drama, The Merchant of Venice. Okay. I'll remember when I was looking after a hostel in Ramakrishna Mission headquarters, we took a part of that and got our students enact part of it. Okay. Remember, Merchant of Venice has Shylock. The storyline is one beautiful, actually. He has a part with a part of his flesh, if as per the condition. The lady that comes in and gives this argument in the form of a lawyer. I had read this story earlier, not in the original. I had read by the Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb, isn't it? Am I correct? In that you have the narration of the tale. I had read it in my younger days. But when I got my students to enact that, I really delved deeper into it. Similarly, these Vedantic precepts also, only reading won't do. Once you lead a good life, the Karma Yoga or the practical Vedanta, then these truths would be more and more apparent to you. Okay. I think we can now give pause for Arati.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Namaskar.